Last year, when Red Hat made changes to the way users can access the source code of RHEL or the Red Hat Enterprise Linux, the Enterprise Linux vendor ecosystem responded by creating OpenELA, the Open Enterprise Linux Association. Today we have with us once again Wim Coekaerts, Executive Vice President of Software Development at Oracle. Wim, it's great to have you back on the show.
Hi, good to see you again.
These three companies, Oracle, SUSE and CIQ, banded together to create OpenELA. Can you talk about what was the exact problem that you folks wanted to solve that led to the creation of this association?
Sure. So in the summer of 2023, to make sure that we have a specific time frame and date here, so about a year ago from this recording, or less than a year ago from this recording, there was a decision around the availability of enterprise Linux, and that affected a huge community of people. It started sooner with CentOS and the availability and future direction of CentOS as a fully compatible enterprise Linux alternative, which was used by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people out there. And, lots of folks. One thing I wanted to point out in this answer is there are multiple types of users for an enterprise Linux distribution, right? One is you have developers that build their applications on EL so that this can be run on the different versions out there and the different platforms. And they they want to use a standard enterprise Linux distribution where they can also install all the software that's been tested and certified on the main ones. And so then the second part is, of course, customers that run their IT business and infrastructure and production environments on an enterprise Linux distribution. They know it's tested well, they know it works on the different types of hardware, and certainly when it comes to the bigger applications. But the third one that is often missed is partners and companies that have a hardware device, or they have an appliance, software appliance, a VM appliance that embeds an enterprise Linux distribution as part of their offering. So it's an embedded model. It's not the main thing that they distribute. It's their application, but pre-installed. And so those are the three different main sort of aspects of when we talk about enterprise Linux users. And so by having less options here, all three of them became at risk, or had a risk factor going forward. And so the three of us, the three companies, CIQ, Oracle, and SUSE, were already working hard for many years on ensuring that we had an alternative out there that was fully compatible. And so we stepped up and said, look, we will continue what we're doing. And all three of us are doing the same thing in different ways with different market targets, right? We each have our strengths. And so let's just work together and ensure that we won't do what happened. We have been releasing the source code for everything publicly, including errata, updates, everything. All the source code for everything we do is publicly available. So let's just work together and put it in a central repository. And then we all benefit from the work we all do. And everyone else that had a dependency on this, that suddenly basically was told you're out of luck, now can just continue without that fear. So that's really the main part of what happened. And so by creating an association around this, that allowed us to say, okay, here's a GitHub repository. We put all the source code out there. We're not building a central product. We are providing all the tools that we use to build our product and our solution for our customers, but we then provide the same tools so that others can do the same. And we compete, but we compete on our strengths. And it also allows folks to not have that, as I mentioned earlier, to not have that concern. And so we don't build a Linux distribution as part of OpenELA. We provide the source code, we provide the tools, we have contributed documentation, we have tools that basically take out sort of the trademarks and copyrights so you can put your own label on it. And this will actually, I think the end result now is that we have a much bigger open platform than we ever had before, because we provide the tools as well for building and testing that wasn't really publicly available in the past.
You mentioned access to the code. do I have to be a member of OpenELA to access all the code, or is it available freely to anyone without any restrictions whatsoever?
Oh, it's 100% fully open. There is nothing hidden. And that was also the point, right? Because the event that happened was shut down access to source code unless you pay. Well, we don't do that. We never have as individual companies, and through the Open ELA, we certainly will not do that going forward. That's sort of the base premise of it. So all the source code is published publicly at the same time. There is no requirement to join the Open ELA to get access to anything. So there's technically there's no benefit to joining, because you get the same access, the same code as somebody that doesn't join. So in that context, there's no benefit. The benefit is to say, hey, we also have stuff and we want to also contribute those things and enlarge the group of companies and contributors and individual developers that want to participate in this. And in fact, one of the things that I've noticed is developers on, I guess it's now called X, right? It's still a change for me to say that, but basically on Twitter/X, there were some folks saying that they had some bug fixes because they were working on a project on enterprise Linux, and the bug wasn't getting fixed, or they didn't have the ability to get any help. Well, through this platform, they can certainly do that. And I think there is two parts to this. One is we want to have the exact same source code, let's call it bug for bug compatible. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. So identical code, but we also will provide bug fixes, things that everyone participating in OpenELA and everyone participating in building these distributions, when we find problems, then we fix them, and then people can decide to pick them up or not. So that's kind of what's going on here.
And as you emphasized a couple of times that you folks are not building a distribution, you are just providing access to all the repos. But if you look at this mission, of course, things change over time. But do you see that this mission is kind of the long-term goal of the OpenELA community, or you feel like, hey, this is to fix a temporary problem for now? Things may change over a period of time.
No, this is definitely long term. I think that there was a long period of enterprise Linux. Let's talk about, I don't know, 15, 20 years almost. And then suddenly something happened. And so there was nothing to predict that. It was an open ecosystem where all the different parts were working together, and it was considered a good thing to evolve EL. And then at some point, one part of it said, nope, it's just us. And everyone else was left hanging to dry. And so the OpenELA is really like a long-term insurance of, hey, this is going to be around. This is not just temporary. This is not just for a certain version. No matter what happens elsewhere, if the restrictions become more and more, this will remain fully open, and this will remain a base to depend on, and the contributions will always come back. Now, one other thing also is that as part of OpenELA, I want to make sure, security errata and security updates are part of this, right? Not just the base code, not just the base pieces of libraries that have been released, but every single security update and vulnerability that happens. And so we have all the change logs out there. So we're not packaging things up in tar balls or anything like that. It's the full Git repo with all the change logs in there. So it's a completely transparent, easy to track model that anyone can use in a normal development environment and build upon.
You jokingly said that one doesn't have to join OpenELA to take benefit of the work that you folks are doing. But can you also talk about the benefits that vendors, ISVs, IHVs will get by joining this association?
The advantage of participating in this is that we all contribute stuff. And so, on the Oracle side, we might have more strengths when it comes to kernel development and lower level work because of all the hardware that we have and the cloud infrastructure that we have. And then CIQ obviously an interest in high performance computing because of the background from some of the folks at CIQ. So they have their strengths. And so by participating in this, we basically cover the entire sort of industry base of different aspects of what happens on operating system development and the needs for those different industries. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I think there's a benefit from joining, because the more people or the more companies or entities and developers that join, the more visibility OpenELA will get. And I think that's good from a, let's call it, marketing point of view. Not that we individually need marketing for something like this. I think it's important that we reduce fragmentation. And what happened and what we saw in the early days of this decision of reducing access to source code was that many different groups and people were going their own direction. And so you ended up with massive fragmentation. And that doesn't help anyone, because then the chances of something not being compatible are much higher. When you pick the wrong one, then you're stuck. And so we said, okay, if we all work together, then at least there is a public message of unity. And so the more folks that join that, the more stability that this model creates. So I think that OpenELA is more about providing a central place to go and participate, to show that we all are working together and there's no fragmentation. And by all working out of the same source trees, then there is no, let's call it, forking. It's just like there's one place to go.
Last year, there were some disturbing developments in the open source, but I don't want to name anyone, but a major company changed the license, which led to creation of a community-backed alternative. It also led to new concerns that just because something is open source does not mean that it will remain open source. When I look at OpenELA, are you folks sending out a message, creating a model that community will ensure that open source remains open source? You can't beat open source.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, everything that we have in the GitHub repos, no matter what the upstream project of that does, whether it's mostly owned by a company that makes a decision, or whether it's owned is the wrong word in this case, but whether it's maintained or built by an individual or a group of individuals that have a different direction going forward. Well, in some ways, what we have in OpenELA and the GitHub repos is already, it goes forward. No matter what now happens with the upstream parts of it, we will follow upstream until there's a day that we're not allowed to or able to. Well, then we continue, because all of us are providing this, and certainly the three companies involved building a Linux distribution where we offer support subscriptions and we help our customers. Well, we have to move forward anyway. We're not going to stop, nor do we have to stop. We're not in a position where we have such a dependency on something that if that dependency drops, we're dead in water. We're not. We have the technical capability to maintain this going forward. And I think that's a good part. We've sort of forked up front, if you want to call it that, if we need to. Yeah. Yeah, we don't have to react to it. We just keep going. I think that's probably the best way to say it.
I mean, if you look at the basic definition of open source, the promise that open source makes is that you can continue to use the software as long as you want. You may or may not be able to get community or commercial supports due to whatsoever reason, but the promise is that you can freely use that piece of code. When we look at OpenELA, what kind of promise are you folks making to the community, to the vendor ecosystem, to the user community?
One way to also look at it is that what we publish under the OpenELA umbrella, the OpenELA has zero ownership of this. So even if OpenELA were to disappear tomorrow, all the source code that is and was published and will continue to be published is freely available for anyone to continue with, right? And so I think that is one important aspect here as well, is that everything we do, we can't, even if we wanted to, obviously we have zero zero conversation about this. It's purely like, made up hypothetical. But even if we wanted to say we will stop doing something, well, whatever we did up to that point is there, and anyone can continue with it. There's no ability to change the license. There's no intent to make a change that it would affect the developers out there. And so it's really freedom. And I think Greg often talks about that. It's a community of people working together, and the result of everything we work on together and publish can continue to be used and continue to be enhanced by anyone out there without restrictions. And I think that's the big benefit. And again, a sense of security for all of this work.
Of course, I cover open source, so I do care a lot about open source. You care about open source. But when I talk to a lot of customers, yes, they do care about open source because it is solving their problem over a proprietary solutions. But what they care about even more is that they want to be able to call someone if something goes wrong, if they want more features, if they want more functionalities. And if you look at open source, it has a great vendor ecosystem to help those customers. When it comes to OpenELA, what kind of commercial support or vendor ecosystem is there?
So I guess we can use, let's use Oracle and Oracle Linux here, since I'm obviously pretty tightly coupled with that. So, we're in the business of providing a great operating system solution, a Linux operating system, to our customers. And yeah, like you said, customers pay us a subscription fee for support. Whether the code they run is open source or not, technically does not matter to the user in this case. They run binaries. They don't build Oracle Linux from source code. They don't really care about that in the context of directly building it. However, a lot of Linux users and customers do care about the fact that if the company were to misbehave, or were to go out of business, or were to increase their prices 100-fold or something like that, that they're not stuck. And so one of the advantages with running Linux and getting it from a Linux distribution vendor, at least, was that you get a license to the source code, and you even if you stop paying, you still have the ability to keep using it. You might not get the support, but you can still keep using it. And I think that one of the advantages with how we do that is we want to maintain that sort of security for these companies, that they feel like they're not stuck and they're not held hostage. And that's one of the advantages that we do in this model, right?
Wim, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about OpenELA. Thank you so much for the great insights. And as well, I'd love to talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Of course. Nice to see you again. Take care.